Welcome everybody to our college test prep webinar. In this webinar, Allie and I are hoping to answer all of your questions regarding the SAT and ACT. That said, at the end, if you still have questions, contact me. My contact information is here on the website. Before we get into it, we are going to do a 10 fingers exercise. Now, we can't see you, but if you would hold up 10 fingers, this is what we normally do in our webinars. Going to ask you a question, and with your fingers, show us from 0 to 10, how important do you think the SAT or ACT is to you if you're the student, or to your child if the child is the student? In other words, how important is getting a good score on these tests to your child's future? What are you going to hold up from 0 to 10? Okay, well, obviously we can't see what you held up, but Allie and I, when we do these webinars, typically people hold up around an 8. So like it or not, good or bad, it does seem that people agree it's a very important test and it impacts the student's future. So before we get into the information, let's introduce ourselves to you a little bit better. My name is Rich Goldman. I've been tutoring SATs and ACTs for 25 years. Yes, since this was Brown, and before I even had this, I've worked for Kaplan and Princeton Review in the past for many years. I'm Ivy League educated. I do not say that to boast. I say that to use myself as an example. I did test prep when I was that age. I got a very good SAT score. I got into a great school, and my life has been impacted incredibly because of that. I'm just an example. I'm a husband, a father, a people lover, and a lover of wildlife. Let me pass it over to my colleague, Allie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allie Warland, and I have 4 years of SAT tutoring experience. And before I started working with Rich, I worked at Varsity Tutors. I also have experience as a high school geometry teacher, which some of you may know. Geometry is a big part of the SAT and ACT math sections. And outside of my tutoring, I'm also a swim coach. So the first question we're going to be looking at today is why a student should still take a test even though the trend is test optional. So first of all, taking the test is going to help a student stand apart from the crowd. A good score will improve overall admission package, and it will never harm admission chances. Average test scores are trending downward due to this test optional trend. Therefore, it's easier for a student to rise above. It's also important to note that because the test is optional, this can make the process less stressful for your student, which can also lead to a higher score. And also, schools may reinstate testing requirements, so it's good to have that score ready to go in case that happens. So because of these points, these are in favor of just going ahead and taking the SAT or ACT.
Thanks, Allie. So on that note, SAT or ACT, which test is better for the student? Well, let's break it down. On the left-hand column, there's information about the SAT, and in the right-hand column, there's information about the ACT. Let's compare the two tests. Let's start on the left with that line that's underlined, the SAT. 4 sections. It's a 3-hour test. There are 154 total questions, and the highest one can score on the SAT is 1,600 points. Let's hop across the aisle to the ACT. Also 4 sections, also 3 hours, but 215 questions. There are more questions in the same amount of time. So pay attention to that. Now, this is scored entirely differently. The ACT, the top score one could have on the ACT is 36 points. Let's hop back over to the left. Let's look at the green bullets under SAT and find out what those sections are all about. On the SAT, there's a reading section, a writing and language section, a math section where a calculator is not permitted, and a math section where a calculator is permitted. Let's go this way. For the ACT, there's an English section, a math section where a calculator is permitted, a reading section, and a science section. Now let's compare the sections because some of them do seem similar. Let's go back to the left to the red bullets. The reading section on the SAT, it's a little bit longer than the reading section on the ACT, and it has questions that are linked, not all of them, but it has some questions which are linked together, and what we call them tandem questions. Let you take a look at what we mean. This is a typical tandem question on the SAT reading. And what it is, if you look at the top question, the student has to answer a question about a passage. The question underneath, look what it says. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? The reason this is difficult is because if the student misses that first question, they're probably going to miss the bottom question. And that makes the reading section on the SAT just a little bit tougher. Let's go to the writing and language sections. On the SAT, the writing and language, on the ACT, there's an English section. They're called different things. They're basically identical, so they're a wash. Let's go to the math sections. As we mentioned on the SAT, there are 2 math sections. There's 1 on the ACT, but the math sections on the SAT, there's a group of questions at the end of each section that we call grid-ins. And grid-in questions are not multiple choice. They're where a student has to come up with their own answer. That alone makes these a little bit more difficult. On the ACT, the 1 math section is all multiple choice. Finally, we come to the science section. Now, that's the biggest difference between the 2 tests. On the SAT, no science section. On the ACT, there is a science section. Now, let me make you aware that it's not a science section which is asking you to dig up information from your past biology classes. You're not going to have to answer what's meiosis or what's the purpose of photosynthesis. Primarily, what the ACT science section asks is for students to find data points in graphs and figures and charts. I'll let you take a look at an example of that. So if you look at this chart, this is an example of a typical ACT science section. I'm going to use Allie as a guinea pig. Allie, if you were an ACT student, here's a typical question. For enzyme D, D as in dog, 15 mm. Allie, do you know what mm stands for?
I do not.
Well, you know what, Allie? You don't need to know, and you're never going to need to know. But for enzyme D, 15 mm at 30 degrees Celsius, what is the enzyme velocity?
30.7.
Allie, you got it right. You may want to consider the ACT. That's a typical question. They do get more difficult than that, but by and large, that's what the science section is all about. So what does this all boil down to? Well, let's look at the blue lines below each column. If a student is really good in math, lean towards the SAT. If they're really good in digging out data from charts and graphs, lean toward the ACT. Now, if you want to learn more about how can we determine really what test is best for the student, there's a button on the website that you can push that says SAT or ACT. That'll help you decide. Any other questions? Contact me.
Okay, so the next question we're going to be addressing is when a student should take the test. So the latest first time, meaning a student can take the test before this, but the latest first time should be junior year spring. So that's your second half of your junior year. And then the drop dead last time that a student should be taking the test is senior year fall. So that first chunk of senior year. But if you're going to wait until this drop dead last time, make sure that you talk to your admissions counselor just to make sure that you're meeting all of your college application deadlines. And here is a list of our upcoming SAT and ACT test dates. You can take a screenshot. You can also look these up. But it's important to note here that online registration deadlines are typically about 1 month prior to these test dates that you see here.
Great. Thank you, Allie. So why work with a tutor? Here's a list of reasons why. First and foremost, whether this is fair or not, a tutor's expertise is needed. The expertise of a tutor is needed for a student to do their very best on a test. You can call that unfair, but that's really the way it is. The tutor has insider tips and strategies that are invaluable to getting one's highest score. Tutors also help with time management. Time management is very difficult to deal with on one's own, but the tutor can help the student manage their time to make sure they answer as many questions on each section as possible. Tutors also help with a study plan that makes sense. And also they're there for accountability. Imagine if you're working alone, how easy it is to let yourself slide. When you're working with a tutor, there's regular accountability. Tutors also help with motivation, positive reinforcement, and along those lines, most importantly of all, and equally important to the knowledge a tutor is going to impart, is confidence building. We instill the student with confidence so they can nail their test. Now, if you're thinking of going with tutoring, you may be wondering, private sessions or classes. There's pros to each. Let's start on the left with the one-on-one private sessions. First of all, there's undivided attention, right? There's the tutor and the student, and it's all one-on-one. Undivided attention, not spread amongst various students. There's also a personalized curriculum. The tutor can assess the strengths and weaknesses of that one and only student and devise a curriculum to address that. Finally, there's custom tailored pacing. The tutor will go as slow or as fast as a student requires at any given moment. The pacing is tailored directly to that one and only student. However, there's also some benefits to the classes. One is comfort in numbers. Students know how important these tests are. There's a lot riding on these tests. And when they drop into a class and see their peers and know that they're not alone in this endeavor, it's very comforting. Being in a class, one also benefits from peer motivation and peer learning. Some students, for example, are afraid to ask questions, but they can benefit from the questions that others ask. Some students may have solved a problem correctly, but they can benefit from seeing how other students may have solved a problem differently. And also, classes are much more economical than private sessions. So studying in general, when should a student start studying for one of these tests, and how often should the sessions be? And the answer is, the more in advance of the test, the better. There's just that much to learn. And even 1 year in advance is not too far in advance. The more practice, the better. However, Allie and I have come up with a sweet spot for when to start studying. And that's 6 months prior to a test date, 2 times per week, 1.5 hours per session. Now, anything less than that I just went through is still okay. Even a weekend crash course is better than nothing, but that's the sweet spot.
All right, so the answer here is as many as one can. The question is, how many times should a student take the SAT or ACT? So remember, only your best score is submitted. So if you take the test and you don't like your score, you can just take it again. Most colleges do accept an SAT SuperScore, and more colleges are beginning to accept an ACT SuperScore. And if you're not familiar what a SuperScore is, it's where you can take your highest scores from different sections of different tests, even if they're taken on different test dates, and combine them to create your SuperScore. As far as testing goes, 2 times is about the norm, 3 times is pretty common, 4 or more is great. Again, you can take it as many times as you need to. When do scores come back? So the SAT is going to take about 2 weeks, and you'll get your ACT scores back in around 10 days. Okay, so if you do decide to go with a tutor and hire someone to work with you or work with your student, here are your keys to success. So you're going to want to make sure you attend all of your scheduled sessions, stay focused, participate through requesting clarification and asking questions. And most importantly, I think, is to do all of your homework assignments. As Rich mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of working with a tutor is that they keep you on track and hold you accountable. And one of the ways that they do this is through assigning homework. And most importantly, stay positive, because you got this.
It really is all about the mindset. Remember, we don't want these college exams to be scary. We want these exams to be an opportunity for you to show colleges what you're capable of. We want you to go into your test with a victorious mindset. We want you to take charge of your own future. So that's the end of all the information. Thank you so much for watching this. Again, if there's any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here for you. Hope that was helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.